Part 1. The Outcasts, 800 Words. They drifted at the far edge of the galaxy where the stars grew thin and the dark stretched endless. Their fleet was a shadow of what it once had been, wounded ships limping together, bound by rust, scars, and desperation. They were called many names once, explorers, dreamers, and builders of great worlds. Now they were only known as the Banished. The sentence had been cruel, delivered by voices from shining halls of the Galactic Council. Those voices carried judgment that cut deeper than any blade. Unclean, unfit, unwanted. Their home world was stripped, their cities burned from orbit. Their name was erased from archives, their symbols struck from star maps. Even speaking their tongue became forbidden in civilized space, and so they wandered. The Banished had no world, no allies, no welcome anywhere they went. When they approached star systems, the defenses rose. When they begged at trade stations, doors were shut. Some worlds fired warning shots the moment Banished ships entered orbit. Others sent patrols to chase them out as if they were disease. No one wanted them, not because of what they had done, but because of what others believed they were. Lies had spread, twisted rumors that painted them as dangerous, as cursed. They were not monsters, not invaders, not plague bearers. They were only a people broken by fear. But the galaxy did not care. Fear was enough. Their fleet was more like a graveyard than an armada. Ships once proud with banners and lights now floated dark, patched together with scavenged parts. Many engines coughed and stuttered. Some worked only half the time. Whole sections of ships were sealed off, left hollow and cold because life support could not reach them. Inside those ships, hunger gnawed every day. Food was rationed to crumbs. Water was recycled until it tasted of metal and ash. The air was thin in places, heavy with sickness in others. The strong tried to carry on, but the weak, especially the children, were fading. The children were the worst sign of their fall. Once they had laughed, running through bright gardens on their homeworld, singing songs passed down by their elders. Now they sat quiet in dark corners, their bellies empty, their eyes wide with fear. Some cried at night, muffled sobs carrying through thin walls. Many no longer cried at all. Hope had become a ghost. The elders did their best to keep faith alive, whispering promises of survival, of one day finding peace. But even their voices shook with doubt. Many asked themselves the same question. How much longer can we go on? They had no place to go. The stars stretched before them like an endless desert. Each time they thought they saw refuge, it turned to dust in their hands. And still they moved forward, not because they believed in tomorrow, but because standing still meant death. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The Banished drifted like shadows, unseen and unwanted. Then one day something changed. It came not as a weapon, not as a warning, but as a voice. Simple, small, and unexpected. A signal, cutting through the static of the void, reaching their failing receivers. It was not the voice of the Council. Not the voice of enemies. It was something different. "We see you," the message said. "Do you need help?" At first they thought it was a trick. They had been fooled before. Pirates had once pretended kindness only to board their ships and strip them bare. Another empire had lured them with promises of shelter, only to use them as slaves until they escaped. Why should this signal be any different? Yet there was something strange about it. The voice carried no threat, no demand, no disdain, only concern. Only a question, the elders argued. Some said it must be a trap. Others said it was too dangerous to answer. But some, those who still carried fragments of hope, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this time was different. The signal repeated, again and again, patient and calm. The Banished listened, and for the first time in centuries, something stirred inside their hearts, a fragile spark, a whisper they had almost forgotten. Hope. They did not yet know the senders. They did not yet know the strange beings who had reached across the void. But they would learn soon enough. The name of those beings was humanity. Part 3. The Gift of Shelter. 800 Words. The humans did not stop with one visit. They returned again and again, their ships carrying crates of food, medicine, and tools. Each time they came, the Banished watched in awe, unable to believe this kindness was real. At first, the Banished accepted the gifts with trembling hands, waiting for the moment the humans would demand something in return. But the demands never came. No contracts, no threats, No hidden chains. Instead, the humans stayed. They walked through the broken corridors of the banished fleet. They saw the leaking pipes, the flickering lights, the sick children lying on makeshift beds. And without waiting for permission, they began to help. Engineers pulled apart failing engines and rebuilt them piece by piece. Medics moved from ship to ship, treating wounds and sickness with patience and gentle voices. Teachers carried data pads filled with knowledge, offering lessons to young ones who had never known a real school. The banished could hardly understand it. Why would anyone do this? Why waste their strength on people cast out by the galaxy? One banished mechanic, an old man named Karis, followed a human engineer as he repaired a collapsed generator. His voice shook with suspicion. "Why are you doing this? You could keep these tools for your own people. You could leave us in the dark." The human only smiled faintly, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Because light is meant to be shared." Simple words. But they carried more power than any speech the banished had heard in centuries. Slowly, something began to change. Children who had once sat silent now gathered around the humans, wide-eyed, watching them work. Some of the humans taught them games, showing them how to laugh again. Mothers cried quietly when they saw their children running through the corridors, their voices filled with joy instead of fear. Food was no longer ash and crumbs. Banished families gathered around warm meals, tasting fruits and grains they thought they would never see again. Every bite was a reminder they were still alive. They were still worth saving. The humans even repaired the great flagship's viewing dome, which had been shattered long ago. For the first time in generations, the banished stood beneath clear glass and looked out at the stars without fear. Children pressed their hands against the window, pointing at constellations. Elders whispered old stories, voices trembling as memories returned. But the greatest gift was not food or medicine or even repairs. It was dignity. The banished had spent centuries feeling like shadows, like ghosts drifting through a galaxy that no longer wanted them. Every world had treated them as pests, as less than nothing. But the humans looked at them differently. They did not see the banished. They saw people. One day, Elder Salen asked a human captain directly. Her voice was heavy with disbelief. "Why us? Why risk angering the galaxy for a people who are broken?" The human captain, a tall man with scars on his face, did not hesitate. He answered with quiet strength. "Because we know what it feels like to stand alone, and we know how much it means when someone finally stands with you." Those words spread like fire through the fleet. They were whispered from ship to ship, carried in hushed voices and hopeful hearts. The banished began to believe something they had not dared believe for centuries, that they mattered. Not everyone trusted instantly. Some banished still feared betrayal, still kept hidden weapons close, still woke at night expecting chains, but little by little the walls of fear cracked. Trust grew slowly, like a seed pushing through dry soil. The humans did not push them, did not demand gratitude. They simply kept helping day after day, as though it was the most natural thing in the universe. And in time, the banished stopped waiting for the knife behind the smile. They started to believe the smiles were real. And so life returned. It was not easy, not perfect, but it was life. Children played. Families sang again. Lights shone in corridors long abandoned. The banished, once drifting shadows, felt the weight of despair lifting. The galaxy had cast them out, erased their names, declared them unworthy. But humanity had reached into the void and said, "You are not forgotten." And for the banished, that truth was more precious than any world. It was the gift of shelter, not only of body but of spirit. They were no longer alone. Part 4. The Conflict. 800 words. For a time, peace lived among the banished. Their ships grew stronger. Their people sang again. The children laughed freely in corridors once filled only with silence. And always the humans were there, repairing, teaching, protecting. But the galaxy was not blind. The Council, rulers of 1,000 worlds, soon turned their eyes toward this unlikely bond. They had decreed long ago that the banished were to be erased, never again to stand among civilized races. To see them now rising, carried by the hands of humanity, was an insult to that decree. And so the warnings began. The first came as cold messages, sharp with arrogance. "Cease your aid. You interfere with matters beyond your understanding. The banished are cursed. If you continue, you risk sharing their fate." The humans replied with words just as steady. We help because it is right. We will not abandon them. The council's fury grew. They tried to paint the banished as monsters in human ears, spreading lies of crimes never committed. They spoke of danger, of corruption, of disease. But the humans did not believe. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. They had held banished children, healed banished wounds, and listened to banished songs. No rumor could twist that away. When words failed, the council turned to fear. Warships appeared at the edges of human space, armadas glittering with power, their hulls carrying the pride of empires older than humanity itself. They broadcast one message only. Turn the banished away or we will strike. The banished trembled when they heard this. Guilt filled their hearts like lead. They had been cursed for centuries, and now their curse had fallen upon their saviors. Mothers clutched their children tightly, whispering that it would all end again, that even humanity would now abandon them to survive. Elder Terran wept as he spoke to a human envoy. Leave us. Save yourselves. Do not die for a people the galaxy has already thrown away. But the humans did not leave. The envoy, a woman with silver hair and steady eyes, shook her head. We do not measure worth by the council's words. We choose who deserves our protection. And we choose you, simple words, unshakable resolve. The banished had never heard such defiance spoken for their sake. The galaxy's judgment had always been final, unquestioned. But here were humans, fragile in body compared to many races, daring to stand against the mighty council without flinching. The council did not take this defiance lightly. They ordered blockades seeking to choke the banished into despair once more. Convoys of food and medicine were attacked. Patrols threatened every human ship carrying aid. The banished watched in terror as human convoys left for missions, never knowing if they would return. Every hour felt like a knife twisting in their hearts, but the humans did not falter. They armed their ships, escorted their convoys with fighters, and sent their captains forward with grim determination. They did not fight for conquest or for glory. They fought for a simple truth that no one should be abandoned. Still, the banished were afraid. Every day they whispered, "We are cursed. We will destroy them as we destroyed ourselves." But one night, as stars shone outside the repaired dome of their flagship, a group of banished children gathered around a human soldier. They asked him if he was afraid. The soldier smiled softly, his hands resting on his rifle. Afraid, of course. But fear does not decide what is right, and what is right is standing by you. The children carried those words back to their parents. Soon the whole fleet whispered them like a prayer. Fear remained, but it no longer ruled. The banished began to see humanity not only as saviors, but as something greater, warriors of principle, guardians who stood against the galaxy's cruelty with iron will. And so, as the council's fleets loomed larger, the banished did not beg the humans to leave anymore. Instead, they stood beside them. Weak, yes. Scarred, yes. But no longer alone. For the first time in centuries, the banished realized that perhaps their story was not ending in exile. Perhaps it was only beginning, written now with the strength of humanity beside them. And somewhere, deep in the hearts of both peoples, a fire began to burn. A fire that the council would soon learn could not be easily extinguished. Part 5. The War of Shadows, 800 words. The first battle came like a storm. A human convoy of food and medicine was moving toward the banished fleet when the council struck. Their warships appeared out of the void, towering giants of metal and fire built to crush resistance before it could begin. Their message was short and merciless: turn back or be destroyed. The humans did not turn back. The banished watched from afar, their hearts frozen in fear. They had seen this before. Council fleets meant death. No one could stand against them, not the banished, not even strong empires. And yet the humans advanced. Their ships were smaller, their weapons fewer. But they moved with a courage that burned brighter than the enemy's firepower. Human captains shouted orders with steel in their voices, and their crews answered with loyalty born of choice, not fear. The battle erupted. Blinding light filled the void as council cannons roared. Human ships twisted and turned, dodging blasts that could tear them apart in a single strike. Fighters poured out of carriers, darting like angry hornets, swarming ships far larger than themselves. It was madness. It was reckless. It was human, the banished wept as they watched. These Deathworlders fought not for territory, not for resources, but to protect a people the galaxy had cast away. Every maneuver, every sacrifice was for them. One small human frigate, already burning, positioned itself between a council destroyer and the convoy. The crew knew they would not survive, but still, they held their course, shields failing, hull splitting apart. With one final burst of engines, they rammed the destroyer head-on. Both ships vanished in a bloom of fire. The banished cried out in horror and in awe. "Why?" whispered Elder Seelan, tears streaming down her face. "Why would they give their lives for us?" No one answered. But deep inside, every banished knew the truth. Humanity had chosen them. The war did not end with one battle. It spread like fire through the stars. The Council sent more fleets determined to break humanity's defiance. Each time they expected quick victory. Each time they were met with resistance fiercer than they had ever known. Human ships were not the strongest, but their tactics were wild, unpredictable. Where other species fought with rigid precision, humans fought with creativity, with desperation, with a willingness to risk everything. They turned asteroids into weapons, used broken ships as traps, and launched attacks that seemed suicidal, yet somehow brought victory. And every time a human fell, another rose to take their place. The banished lived in constant fear, but also in constant wonder. They could not fight, not yet, but they stood at the edges of battles, tending the wounded, sending prayers, and watching in silence as humans bled for them. The galaxy whispered in disbelief. Rumors spread of human fleets tearing apart council armadas, of fragile Deathworlders refusing to bow. Some called them mad, others called them heroes. But one truth echoed louder than all. Humanity would not abandon the banished. The Council grew desperate. Their fleets were vast, their weapons mighty, but they could not break the will of a species that fought with their very soul. Every defeat cracked the illusion of their power. Empires that had once bowed to the Council began to doubt. Could it be that these humans, so young, so fragile, were showing the galaxy a different way? The banished began to change too. They were no longer only victims. Watching humanity fight lit a fire in them. They began repairing old ships, training their youth, and standing taller than they had in centuries. Hope was no longer a whisper, it was a roar carried on human courage. And then, one day, a miracle happened. A council fleet, vast and terrible, cornered a human convoy. The banished, weak and still healing, could have hidden. They could have waited, but instead they joined the fight. Their ships, scarred and fragile, surged forward beside humanity's. Their weapons were old. Their shields were weak, but their voices carried across the comms with pride. "We fight with you. We will never be silent again." The humans answered with a single phrase, "Welcome to the line." Together they struck. The banished lost many ships that day, but they did not weep with despair. They wept with pride, for at last they were not running, not hiding. They were fighting for their future, fighting alongside the only people who had ever believed in them. And though the Council still held power, something had shifted in the stars. For the first time, the banished were not hunted shadows. They were warriors reborn, standing hand in hand with humanity. Part 6. The Bond, 800 Words. The war did not end quickly. Battles raged across forgotten systems and lonely stars. Humans bled, banished ships burned, and the Council continued to send their mighty fleets. But in the end, something stronger than weapons decided the outcome. Resolve. Humanity would not bend, and the banished would no longer hide. When the war finally slowed, when the Council's fleets retreated in shame, silence fell across the stars. For the first time in centuries, the banished did not wake to fear. They woke to possibility. Humanity did not treat their survival as a victory parade. There were no grand speeches of dominance, no banners declaring conquest. Instead, the humans simply stayed, quietly building a new future. They gave the banished more than supplies. They gave them worlds, small green planets, untouched, rich with air, water, and soil. Humanity did not keep these worlds for themselves. They offered them freely to the banished. "You deserve a home again," the human leaders said. The banished wept as they set foot on fresh ground for the first time in generations. Children dug their hands into the soil, laughing with joy. Elders knelt and kissed the earth, whispering prayers to ancestors who had died in exile. Families built shelters, planted seeds, and lit fires that were not for survival, but for celebration. Yet more precious than land was what humanity gave them in spirit. For centuries, the banished had been forced to see themselves as less as cursed as unwanted shadows. But the humans never once looked at them that way. To humanity, they were equals, partners, brothers and sisters who had simply been wronged by a cruel galaxy. One evening, beneath the sky of their new world, a great gathering was held. Banished and humans stood side by side, fires burning bright between them. Songs were sung, old banished melodies joined by human voices learning the words for the first time. Children of both peoples danced together, no longer divided by fear or suspicion. Elder Selen stood before the crowd. Her voice shook, but not with weakness, this time with strength. "We were exiles," she said. "We were broken and forgotten. And yet you came to us. You gave us food when we starved. You gave us medicine when we were sick. You gave us hope when even we had abandoned it. Humanity." Her eyes shone with tears. "You made us family." The humans listened in silence, but their eyes too filled with emotion. Selen raised her hand, trembling but proud. "From this day, wherever humanity walks, the banished will walk beside them. You carried us when we could not stand. Now we stand with you." The crowd erupted in cheers and cries. The banished shouted with pride, their voices echoing across the valley. Humans clapped and raised their hands high. In that moment, there was no difference between them. Two peoples had become one. Afterward, bonds deepened even more. Banished children studied in human schools, learning sciences and arts once lost to them. Human engineers taught banished apprentices how to build ships not just for survival, but for exploration and pride. Banished healers shared their own ancient knowledge with human doctors, blending traditions to save more lives. Friendships formed. Families mixed. Laughter became common again, but the banished never forgot the price humanity had paid. Too many human ships had been lost, too many human lives given. Graves filled new soil, bearing names that were not banished but human. And so, the banished built monuments tall and shining, carved with the names of every human who had fallen for them. Children were taught those names, reciting them with respect, so they would never fade into silence. For the banished, this bond was more than survival. It was rebirth. They no longer saw themselves as victims of a cruel decree. They saw themselves as proof that even in the coldest galaxy, kindness could ignite like fire. They were no longer only the banished. They were brothers of humanity, guardians of one another, and the galaxy, watching from afar, began to whisper in awe. The Council had tried to erase them. Instead, humanity had raised them higher than ever before, and together, hand in hand, they were ready to face whatever came next. Part 7, The Legend, 800 Words. Years passed, and the scars of war began to fade. Where once there had been ruins, new cities rose. Where once there had been silence, children's laughter filled the air. Humanity and the banished did not just survive together, they thrived. The banished had once been afraid to speak their name, ashamed of the weight it carried. But now they spoke it proudly. "We are the banished," they said, but no longer alone. The galaxy watched in silence. The Council, humiliated and broken by its own cruelty, had retreated to nurse its shame. Yet across the stars, other species who had long suffered in silence took note. They whispered about the humans and the banished, about how the smallest, most fragile-looking world had stood against the might of empires and won, not with cruelty, but with compassion. Soon envoys from distant civilizations began to approach. They were careful, hesitant, as if afraid that humanity's fire might burn them too. But instead of rage, they were met with open hands. "You are welcome," the humans said. "You are not alone," the banished echoed. A new alliance began to take shape, not built on fear or control, but on trust. The galaxy that had once turned its back on the banished now found itself drawn to the light of their survival. The exiles had become leaders, their story spreading from star to star, inspiring those who had been forgotten. But even as peace grew, humanity and the banished never stopped preparing. They remembered too well how fragile safety could be. Together they built fleets, not for conquest, but for defense. Ships flew the banners of both peoples, their crews mixed, their hearts united. Where once banished ships had been scattered, hiding in dark corners, Now they sailed proudly alongside human carriers protecting the innocent. The bond was sealed not only in steel, but in blood. Families of mixed heritage became common. Human and banished children grew up without ever knowing the old barriers. To them, there was no difference. Their parents' stories sounded like distant legends, too heavy to match the laughter of their everyday lives. On the anniversary of the Council's decree, the day the banished had been cast out so long ago, both peoples held a great remembrance. The banished gathered in their new cities, humans standing beside them. Fires burned bright and voices rose in song. But this time the songs were not of grief. They were of triumph. Elder Selen, now older and frail, stood once more before her people. Her hair had turned white, her hands trembled, but her eyes carried the same fire they had on the day she spoke beneath the valley sky. Once, she said, her voice quiet but steady, we were told that we were not worthy to belong to the galaxy, that we were weak, that we were nothing. She paused, looking at the faces before her, banished human and children of both. But now we stand as proof that no voice, no decree, can erase a people who choose to endure. The crowd cheered, tears shining in their eyes. Selen smiled and turned to the humans gathered nearby. And you, she whispered, her voice breaking, you who could have turned away, you did not. You saw us. You chose us. You gave us not just survival but dignity. Humanity did not simply take us in. You raised us up. In the silence that followed, it was a human child who stepped forward. She carried a torch, its flame flickering against the night. Gently, she offered it to Selen. The elder's frail hands closed around it, lifting it high. This flame, Selen declared, is the bond between us. It will burn so long as even one voice remembers, and it will never be forgotten. From that night onward, the flame became a symbol. Every year, on every banished and human world, torches were lit in remembrance. Not just for survival, not just for victory, but for unity. The galaxy could no longer look away. The story of the banished and the humans spread to every star system. Scholars wrote of it, singers carried it, and those who had been oppressed whispered it like a prayer. The words changed, the details shifted, but the heart of it always remained the same. That humanity had seen the broken and lifted them, that the banished had risen from the ashes of exile to stand proud once more. Generations later, children would ask, is it true? Did the banished really walk the stars with no home? Did humanity really fight the empires for them? And the elders would smile, their eyes distant but warm. Yes, they would answer, it is true. And because of them, we are free. Thus, what began as exile ended as legend. And in the cold, endless dark of the galaxy, that legend burned like a star, bright, defiant, and eternal. Part 2. The Meeting. 800 words. The banished had learned long ago to distrust every hand that reached toward them. Too many times promises had turned into chains. Too many times kind words had hidden sharp teeth. So when the human signal came, repeating the same gentle question, we see you. Do you need help? The banished felt torn between hope and terror. Their leaders gathered in the dim council chamber of their crippled flagship. The walls hummed weakly, life support struggling to hold on. Elder Terran spoke first, his voice cracked with age. It is a trap. The galaxy knows our suffering. Why would these strangers act differently? They will trick us, strip our ships, enslave our children. Others nodded. Memories of betrayal were still raw. But one younger voice rose, trembling but firm. It was Selen, a mother who had lost 2 children to hunger. Her eyes burned with both pain and longing. And if it is not a trap? If they truly mean to help? How many more must we lose before we risk believing? Silence followed her words. No one answered quickly, for they all carried the weight of grief. At last, the decision was made. They would listen, but carefully. They would send a reply, short and guarded. The banished transmitted, we hear you. We are broken. What do you want from us? The answer came swiftly with no hesitation. We want nothing. We only wish to help. Those words struck like lightning. Want nothing? Such a thing had never been spoken to them before. Every empire they had met demanded something. Labor, ships, obedience. Yet the humans claimed to want nothing at all. And then came the coordinates. A location where human ships would arrive, bearing food and medicine. No demand for surrender, no threat. Just a promise. The Banished prepared with shaking hands. They moved their fleet to the meeting point, engines groaning as though the very ships doubted this hope. Mothers whispered to children, telling them not to be afraid. Fathers clutched tools or makeshift weapons ready in case of betrayal. The air was heavy with fear, but beneath it flickered a fragile thread of curiosity. When the human vessels finally appeared, the Banished fell silent. The ships were unlike any they had seen before. Angular, purposeful, yet not bristling with arrogance. They did not arrive with the overwhelming force of conquerors, but with steady presence like guardians who had come to watch over the weak. The humans hailed them. Their voice filled the halls of the Banished flagship. "We bring aid. Permission to dock?" The elders hesitated, every instinct screaming caution. But at last they granted permission. The docking clamps shook as the first human vessel connected. The Banished stood waiting, hearts pounding. Children hid behind their mothers' legs, peering with wide eyes. Soldiers clutched rusted rifles, though they knew such weapons would mean little. And then the humans came. They stepped through the airlock with slow, careful movements as though they understood how fragile this moment was. They wore plain suits marked with a single symbol of their world, not the banners of conquerors. In their hands they carried crates, not weapons but food, water, medicine. The elders wept openly, unable to contain themselves. Tears streaked their worn faces as they realized these strangers had truly come with gifts of life. A child cried out, pointing to the bright fruits inside one of the crates. It had been years since the Banished had seen such food. The humans knelt and offered the fruit with gentle hands. The child, trembling, took it. The sweetness filled her mouth, and her laughter, so rare, so long absent, echoed through the chamber. That sound broke something inside every Banished heart. For the first time in generations, a child laughed without fear. The humans did not smile arrogantly. They did not look down on the Banished. Instead, they bowed their heads slightly as if showing respect to equals. Elder Terran, who had been most suspicious, stepped forward. His voice shook. "Why do you do this? Why help us when the galaxy has cursed our name?" The human leader, a woman with tired but kind eyes, answered simply, "Because no one deserves to be forgotten. We know what it means to be alone." Her words carried no deceit, no demand, only truth. The Banished felt something stir inside them. It was not full trust yet, not after centuries of betrayal. But it was the first step, the first opening of a door that had been locked too long. And so the meeting ended, not with chains, not with weapons, but with quiet relief. Food was shared, medicine was given, and when the humans left, they promised to return. For the Banished, this moment was not just survival. It was the rebirth of hope. A fragile spark had been lit. And though they did not yet know it, that spark would grow into fire. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same.